viewers, my name is Kiss and welcome back to KTV Network. So, today I'm reacting to how Watch Dogs died by the Hidden One. Uh, that's a nice one. That's a nice name. I like that name. So, I'm reacting to this because I used to be a little passionate about the direction of Watch Dogs, and then I realized how diluted it's become throughout the installments. Number 2 was really good, but it was missing that Alex Mercer. I think his last name is Mercer. Gravitas, because he made the series. And then when Legion came out, I was surprised to see that he was in it, as well as the cyber dude. I forget his name. I liked him too in Watch Dogs 2, which was great. I played that as the prequel to the actual Legion's game. And then imagine my shock and disappointment when I needed some kind of season pass to play as these two characters. And even when you played as these two characters, it wasn't necessarily coherent. Like, the storyline, they didn't recognize certain characters that he had met before, Alex. So, it just, even though the story is a lot better with him involved. But yeah, it just seemed really lackluster, and it seems like they were taking the safe route. They were too afraid to take risks, and I feel like that's why it died. It does have a better chance of coming back than, Saints Row, because Saints Row has retried and died so many times. Since 4, then Get Out of Hell, and Agents of Mayhem, and then Saints Row reboot. What the fuck was that shit? Oh, excuse me for cursing. I don't know why I'm cursing so much. I'm sorry. I'm not like this. I'm trying to clean up my language, but the streamer language comes out, and I'm trying to clean it up for these reactions. But yeah, let's see what the Hidden One has to say. Let's watch.
In the literal sense, since Watch Dogs is dead. And I mean that in the literal sense. Since Watch Dogs Legion released back in 2020, the franchise has been very quiet, and it is reported that the franchise is dead and buried. But how did we get to this point? That's what I want to go over in this video.
Oh, it was made by Ubisoft? That makes sense. Tell me why the Watch Dogs 2 game, the boss looked like Neil Druckmann. Does anybody else think that?
Back in 2012, something quite big happened.
The antagonist?
Ubisoft took to the E3 stage and revealed a brand new IP that nobody saw coming, and that was Watch Dogs. And instantly it grabbed everyone's attention. It looked like a dark, tech-driven thriller where you could hack an entire city. This could be traffic lights, mobile phones, cameras, even any of the people you see walking around, and get access to their personal information, which I do actually have a series on that very thing, by the way. The first Watch Dogs game looked like a next-gen revolution at the time, something that could stand toe-to-toe with GTA 5. But, with more brains over bullets. By the time the game launched in 2014, it became Ubisoft's fastest selling game ever, breaking day one records and moving millions of copies. The trailers had worked. The concept had caught fire. Ubisoft was convinced Watch Dogs was not intended to be a one-hit wonder, as Ubisoft saw it as the future. Then came Watch Dogs 2 in 2016. Now gone was the very dark and depressing Aiden Pierce, replaced by Marcus Holloway, and a more colourful, vibrant San Francisco. The gameplay was notably smoother, the world was livelier, and DedSec felt like a modern-day digital rebellion, instead of this secret hacking underground group. By all accounts, Watch Dogs 2 was the most polished game in the trilogy, and many people who played it often loved it. In fact, it's my favorite entry in the franchise. But here's the thing with Watch Dogs 2 that not many people realize. Most people did not in fact play Watch Dogs 2. The shadow of Watch Dogs 1's broken promises loomed large. Watch Dogs 2 underperformed at launch, and it took years.
Look at that. It had a soft story and a soft launch,
just to match a fraction of the original sales. Now, no way was this game a failure creatively, but instead commercially. Ubisoft saw it as a red flag. Of course, fast forward to 2020 and Watch Dogs 2 has sold over 10 million copies. And speaking of 2020, a new Watch Dogs game was released during that time. And this one was Watch Dogs Legion. A very, let's just say, ambitious experiment.
And it looked like it had so much potential too. Like, the gameplay was a lot of fun, but these randos with crazy eyes.
where the entire gameplay loop was to play as anybody. No main protagonist, just a city full of potential characters to choose from. But with no strong character lead and a very weak supporting cast of side characters, the game struggled to find soul. The systems were clever, but the story was flat. And once again, the game under-delivered on the promise. Fast forward to now in 2025, and Watch Dogs has quietly...
Like the prequel for Watch Dogs Legion, that DLC had so much depth. And I was expecting that for the main for the main game, and it was just, yeah, kind of disappointing.
Faded away from the spotlight. There is no new game in sight. There's been no announcement at all. The social media pages are silent, and there is barely any conversation in the Watch Dogs community. There is also no strong fan base for this franchise anymore. So how did we get here? How did one of Ubisoft's boldest ideas end up dying just after one damaging misstep? Let's go back to where it all started. E3 2012. Ubisoft put out a demo of Watch Dogs 1 that looked insane at the time, and I mean even today, it still looks quite impressive. There was dynamic lighting, realistic weather, and, you know, these very lifelike animations. It just felt like something from the future, like Ubisoft had created something that could stand beside Grand Theft Auto 5 and say yes, but what if you could hack everything? People in the crowd were impressed. The comment sections and reaction videos were shocking. It felt like a big thing at the time. For the next 2 years, Watch Dogs was everywhere. Trailers, demos, interviews, you name it. But here's where it all started to go wrong. The infamous demo was what the industry calls a vertical slice. Basically a handcrafted segment of the game running on a super high-end PC, designed to show what the game could look like, not necessarily what it would look like. At the time, the average gamer did not know that. Most of us took it at face value. We thought what we saw was what we'd get. But by the time Watch Dogs actually released in 2014, the final game did not look anything like the E3 2012. Now, it was not horrendously bad, but by the time Watch Dogs actually at the time, the average gamer did not know that. Most of us took it at face value.
It had people's
we thought what we saw was what we'd get. But by the time Watch Dogs actually released in 2014, the final game did not look anything like the E3 2012.
That's so shady too.
Now know that.
You got him looking like a mess.
What we'd get. But by the time Watch Dogs actually released in 2014, the final game did not look anything like the E3 2012. Now, it was not horrendously bad visually, but it was a noticeable decline in what we saw. The graphics had been downgraded massively, the lighting was flatter, the textures weren't as sharp, and overall
like
it just
his
looked kind of ordinary,
aside from everybody
and
else?
a lot of people noticed. Worse still, modders later discovered that some of the original E3 graphical set batter, the text visually, but it was a noticeable decline in what we saw. The graphics had been downgraded massively, the lighting was flatter, the textures weren't as sharp, and overall it just looked kind of ordinary, and a lot of people noticed. Worse still, modders later discovered that some of the original E3 graphical settings were still in the game's files, just disabled. I'm pretty sure you can download an E3 restoration mod, I believe, so that's always nice to know. But when this all happened back in 2014, the backlash was massive. Reddit forums and YouTube exploded with side-by-side comparisons. In fact, the term downgrade at that time became synonymous with Watch Dogs. What was once the most anticipated game in years became a kind of meme, if you will. And you have to realize this was during a time when Ubisoft were on top. Around that time, they released Assassin's Creed Black Flag, they released Far Cry 4, and everybody loved Ubisoft. Now, to be fair, Watch Dogs 1 was not bad at all. In fact, it was a great foundation for a game. I actually made a full video on Watch Dogs 1 if you're curious about my deeper thoughts on the game itself. But the thing is, being a good game did not matter at that time. It just did not live up to what was promised. And by then, the damage was already done. The trust was broken. The CEO of Ubisoft, Yves Guillemot, even admitted years later that the company raised expectations too high. He said the ambition of the project with its new engine, seamless multiplayer, mobile connectivity and massive open world was probably too much for a first attempt. And in a way, he was not wrong. Because while Watch Dogs 1 was a commercial success, selling millions of copies and breaking Ubisoft's day one sell records, it was also the start of a major trust issue between Ubisoft and their audience, one that I'm sure we all know is clearly still ongoing, and the company is definitely in its worst state right now. Years and years of mistrust and controversy led to what Ubisoft are currently in, and hey, it's
I wonder if they're gonna go out of business, or if they'll be just sucked into another entity.
It's deserved. Say what you want about the original Watch Dogs as a game, but there is one thing that stuck in everybody's minds at that time, and that was Aiden Pierce. He was or is the face of the franchise, a vigilante hacker wearing a trench coat and just a full-on traumatic character, walking the line between a hero and a menace. And whether you loved him or could not stand him, there is no denying that he defined what people thought Watch Dogs was. A man driven by the loss of his niece and willing to do whatever he took to get revenge. He was cold, paranoid, and constantly watching everyone around him, and in that sense, he fit the world perfectly. Aiden's character was not meant to come across as likable, but instead believable. He felt like somebody who had lived through hell and came out more machine than man. Now, was his personality overly depressing at times? Sure, but that was the point. This was not a character that I like to think was meant to crack jokes or lead a team, similar to Watch Dogs 2 and DedSec. He was a lone wolf, and with the themes of the first game being about surveillance, a darker Chicago, and just corruption, I like to say his personality made a lot of sense. The problem is, not everybody was ready for that kind of character at the time. Aiden Pierce was often criticized as bland or one-dimensional, but that's always been up for debate, because while he did not talk much, the game world did a lot of the storytelling for him. Through audio logs, CCTV footage, and phone hacks, we learned who Aiden Pierce really was and what drove him. Ubisoft clearly took note of his lasting appeal too. Years later, they brought him back in Watch Dogs Legion with the Bloodline DLC, and honestly, that expansion reminded me just how great he really was.
That's what I'm talking about.
After the backlash surrounding the first Watch Dogs and the mistrust, Ubisoft had a choice. Either double down on what they had or start fresh. And in 2016 they took a risk. They flipped the tone, changed the setting, brought in a brand new protagonist and completely redefined what Watch Dogs could be. The result was the creation of Watch Dogs 2. And for a lot of people, including myself, this is the best Watch Dogs game to release in my opinion. We got introduced to Marcus Holloway, a new protagonist who was very, and I mean very different.
In your opinion, doesn't mean it's the correct one. Okay, the game itself, as gameplay goes, the best one. Story, number one. Like and I could deal with the setbacks of the first one. I would play it again. I would not play this one again.
To somebody like an Aiden Pierce. He brought energy and humanity to the franchise. Where Aiden was quiet and tormented, Marcus was charismatic and funny, and yet his story still had weight. His journey with DedSec wasn't like the first game at all, where the focus was on personal.
What's funny is I didn't like Marcus too much. I liked the one with the mask. Marcus was alright.
Revenge, but it was more built on the idea that we need to expose corruption, and in a way stand up for freedom in a world being swallowed by data. And speaking of DedSec, this version of the group is way different, and it felt like a real team. Sitara, Wrench, Josh, the crew had chemistry and were written very well. Well, except for Horatio. I thought Ubisoft did a terrible job with his character, but somebody like a Wrench is easily one of the most beloved characters in the Watch Dogs franchise. The actual world of Watch Dogs 2 was also a massive change from Chicago. San Francisco was bright, colorful, and alive. The hacking tools were expanded, the drone and the RC jumper made stealth feel more different, and mission design finally leaned into creativity and freedom. Funnily enough, even though critics praised the game and people who actually gave it a shot loved it, it did not take off the way Ubisoft hoped. Why? Well, the answer is simple. Watch Dogs 1 burned people. The overpromising, the graphical downgrades, the mistrust. It all left a bad taste. So when the sequel dropped, most people...
But that's the PC version. What about the console?
People just did not trust the franchise anymore. A lot of people were not coming back for the second game. So even though the first game sold incredibly well, and even though the series looked like a success on paper, underneath the foundation was shaky. The hype for Watch Dogs was built on a fantasy, and when reality kicked in, the fallout would impact the franchise for years to come. And that is the tragedy, because to me, Watch Dogs 2 was a fantastic game. Easily one of Ubisoft's most polished open world games. But by the time people figured that out, the momentum was gone. It took years for it to reach over 10 million copies sold. And Ubisoft, being Ubisoft, did not look at the quality of the game, because in true fashion they looked at numbers, and to them the slow start was a warning sign. So even though Watch Dogs 2 was a fantastic game, it never got the recognition it deserved. Not because it failed, far from it, but because the franchise's reputation was already hanging by a thread. After 2 games with some pretty cool protagonists and clear identities, Ubisoft decided to take Watch Dogs in a new direction. Enter Watch Dogs Legion. This game was released in 2020 and was marketed as the most ambitious game yet. The big selling point was that you could play as anybody. Literally any NPC that you saw walking around London could be recruited into DedSec and become your playable character.
And it seems cool until I realized there's no character arc here. There's nothing to keep you pulled in. You can't relate to any of these characters, really.
A construction worker, a spy, a grandma in a mobility scooter, if they existed in the game as NPCs, you could make them a part of your team. When I first saw the trailers and marketing, I thought this idea was incredible and revolutionary. No set main character, no single story path, just a massive cast of procedurally generated operatives with unique abilities. I would have also said unique voice lines, but let's be honest, the voice acting was terrible. You'd have a man from India sounding like he was an old white lady, you'd have a white man sounding South. It was just a mix, it just didn't sound right. So how did this interesting concept go for the game? Well, it completely backfired, because the moment you remove a main character, you also risk removing emotional weight, and that's exactly what happened. Without a main character to ground the story, Watch Dogs Legion struggled to tell an interesting one. The operatives you recruited had no real interesting backstories or character growth, no deep motivation, just a random background blurb and a voice filter that barely passed for variety. And while the city of London was beautifully built, in fact I do think Watch Dogs Legion's depiction of London is incredible, and as somebody that lived in London for a few years, they nailed it, but it felt empty, as most Ubisoft open worlds tend to be nowadays. Now, not empty in terms of content, but as in soul and the actual personal stake for any of the characters. There was not a single character in that entire game to care about. Well, actually I lied, there's two. The first one is Bagley, the sarcastic AI companion who ended up stealing the spotlight by default, and he was a bloody robot. And also Sky Larson, because I remember she had a very emotional quest and it was definitely memorable. But apart from that, it felt very generic. Critically, Watch Dogs Legion received mixed to average reviews. Most outlets praised the idea but criticized the execution as expected. It holds a score in the low 70s on Metacritic compared to Watch Dogs 2's solid 82. The common sentiment was the same: great concept, lacking soul.
Wow, Watch
and
Dogs
in terms of
2
sales
has
for
that
Watch
high
Dogs
of a
Legion,
rating?
well, Ubisoft
It was so it had such a weak ending, though. I mean, I guess if you're ruining somebody's image, I swear that was Neil Druckmann.
Never really released official numbers. In fact, I could be mistaken on this part, but I'm pretty sure this was the moment Ubisoft stopped saying copies sold and focused on saying players gained or X amount of players. It's a bit sly of them, don't you think? But while they did not say any numbers for Legion, there are insiders and analysts that suggest Legion underperformed. While it saw a decent launch, boosted by being a cross-gen title for the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, momentum very quickly died. By early 2021, Ubisoft had already started shifting focus away from Legion, cutting off planned multiplayer expansions and future content updates. Now, funnily enough, not long after launch, they released Bloodline, a DLC expansion that brought back Aiden Pierce and Wrench, giving fans of the franchise a more traditional character-driven story. And would you look at that, surprise surprise, it was way better received than the main game. But by then the damage was already done. Watch Dogs Legion did not flop completely, but it definitely did underperform. It failed to give Ubisoft the kind of momentum they were clearly hoping for, and with little post-launch hype, the game quickly faded from conversations, and for the first time since 2014, Watch Dogs went silent. And the truth is, Legion did not kill the series by being awful, it killed it by being so incredibly forgettable. It had ambition, no doubt, but ambition does not mean so much without heart, and in trying to let you play as anybody, Watch Dogs Legion ended up with a bunch of characters that felt like nobody. Since Legion, the franchise has gone completely silent. No sequel in development, no hint of what's coming next, just a once promising franchise that seems to have quietly exited the stage. So here we are, from breaking records in 2014 to complete silence in the years following Legion. Watch Dogs went from Ubisoft's big new flagship to one of their most neglected IPs. And what's strange is there wasn't really one dramatic crash or one headline making failure. The franchise did not explode, but instead it quietly fizzled out. And a lot of that comes down to one thing: the death of hype. Ubisoft, who I'm sure we all know, is a company known for chasing trends and changing focuses very fast. The post-Legion support was very short, future content dried up, and more importantly, no new Watch Dogs game has been teased since. Compare that to their other massive IPs such as Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and even The Crew, if you will. All of these continue to receive sequels, remakes or reboots. But Watch Dogs is very quiet. The community too has gone quiet. There is no strong fanbase pushing for a revival. There's no major modding scene. There's no, big content on YouTube that does well.
There's no forum either for this?
mean, it's rare to even see the games being brought up in online discussions anymore,
like
unless somebody's making a video about forgotten franchises. So is Watch Dogs dead? Well, officially no, but based on what we know from reliable information, it definitely seems like it. And unless Ubisoft decides to take a serious, meaningful swing at it again, whether it is a full reboot, a focused return to character-driven storytelling, it's hard to imagine a comeback. It's quite sad actually. What started as the most exciting new IP in a decade quietly became one of Ubisoft's most forgettable. And that right there is how Watch Dogs died.
Damn. Yeah, that's how it is sometimes. They have, like, there are so many entities that have a lot of IPs that are sleeping, and they just sleep on it, you know, because to focus on well-known IPs. But also, Ubisoft is going under, so it's only a matter of time before another company picks it up, and someone with some creativity, hopefully, you know, that wants to tell us a story and tell us through the lens of Watch Dogs. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Let me know if you agree with this man. Let me know what other videos you want me to react to. Like and subscribe if you vibe. Become a beaut today. And I will see you guys on the live streams. Take care. Thanks for stopping by.